like it was neutral. Really sat there and watched it start to eat away. Yeah. Anything that needs shit real time.
Mr. Rosatos, are you there?
I sure am.
All right, and Dr. Ampoma's making his entrance. Are we ready in the back, Ms. Apodaca?
We are.
Court reporter?
We're on the record.
All right, let's see, where were we? Cross-examination, Mr. Waymire.
Thank you. Thank you. When we left off at the break, we were visiting on these various logs with the plots. I'm going to try to bring this up. The coloring is better electronically. All right. And what we've done here by way of demonstrative is attempt to show across the EMSU the alleged mud losses against Goodnight's top of San Andreas, Empire's top of San Andreas. We've also mapped here the Lovington Sand and Brown. All right. So in I'm muted. Getting feedback somewhere.
What's
Mic check,
Testing.
mic check. I think we're good now. I don't know what was going on there for a second. So again, to just orient here by way of the colors, the purple is the mud losses and drilling that are reported. Like a hot mic coming back. The purple along the bottom, can you see that? And
Yeah.
you're welcome to refer to the hard copy. I'm going to see if I can't. I don't think I can zoom in on this. I'm going to try.
No, I think the one that you previously mentioned was the lost circulation zones.
Yes, that was the purple is what I'm getting at.
Okay, call that purple.
And just in terms of doing your work here, did you ever actually go in and plot well by well where the alleged circulation losses occurred?
I did have that in a spreadsheet form and reviewed the drilling reports to see where those occurred.
With respect to the Andre Johnson, do you see that would have actually occurred above everybody's pick of the San Andreas?
Yes.
Again, just in terms of the idea that that any barrier, if it's based on mud losses, would be isolating injection in the lower San Andreas from the Grayburg. In light of that Andre Dawson well there with the mud loss, alleged lost circulation, can you explain how that would work as a barrier in that location?
Well, yeah, lost circulation is where you have a change in the reservoir, the pressure differential, indicating that you have a barrier on top and a barrier on bottom. And specifically in the Dawson well, that was a very minor volume of lost circulation. And later on, they had some significant loss of variation down in where most of the others wells also lost their circulation. So I think each one of these lost circulations, the top of those is a distinct permeability barrier from everything above it.
Okay, but again, in terms, Have you made any effort to go back and look at the actual logs against the lost circulation to try to make a correlation or distinction there?
Very minor. It wasn't blatantly obvious that there was a large porosity differential, but the pressure and the loss of significant amount of fluid indicates that it is actually a significant permeability barrier.
Well, yeah, and again, I'm just trying to understand, can you talk us through with this data on, well, strike that. The first question is, have you gone well by well where Goodnight alleges circulation losses and tried to correlate that to the porosity and permeability interpretations of Netherlands Sewell to somehow tie those together?
Yes, I have looked at that.
Did you create any actual work product as part of that effort?
No.
So if the commission wanted to see that work product, that doesn't exist. True.
Not in my testimony, no.
We talked about secondary authorities earlier. Get over to those for a moment. All right, as we talk about the producing oil water contact, as I understand it, you had some critiques of Dr. Buckwalter's material balance simulation.
Yes.
And
Disagreements.
let's talk about the producing oil water contact. Are you aware that the producing oil water contact it actually was lowered from 350 feet to about 500 or 300, strike that. Are you aware that the producing oil water contact lowered from 300 feet to about 540, 550 feet?
I don't understand. But I mean, yeah, you'll have to explain a little more.
Yeah, do you know that within the Grayburg, the producing oil water contact actually lowered with production, that it moved deeper subsea?
In the EMSU?
Yes.
No.
If the producing oil water contact lowers by 200 plus feet, what would that do to the water in the Grayburg?
Not sure I understand the question. If
If the producing oil water contact lowers through production of the Grayburg, you with me so far?
I don't understand that concept where that would happen.
In terms of the producing oil water contact,
So you had an oil water contact
yes,
and you produced oil
it goes down.
and it goes down.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that physically happens. Yeah, you can ask me questions.
But, and I may be asking the question, I'm probably asking the question incorrectly here. Are you aware of the oil water contact in the EMSU ever lowering?
No.
If it did lower, what would that do to water in the Grayburg?
If I don't know how to answer that.
So just looking at this Chevron paper from 1989, EMSU Grayburg estimated oil water contact at 550 subsea. Where is your producing oil water contact based on your work?
350.
So that would be off by 200 feet from what Chevron is writing about in 1989, correct?
Yeah, I have seen no evidence at all of a producing oil water contact below 350 feet TVD subsea.
So the additional drilling of new wells after the 80s couldn't lower that oil water contact?
I don't see how that would physically be possible. I believe in gravity.
With respect to the secondary authorities we were visiting on earlier, the 1996 Chevron paper that I mentioned, was this part of anything you reviewed in your literature search in terms of trying to identify literature that would have spoken to communication between the San Andres and the Grayburg?
I don't believe I reviewed this. Is this an exhibit?
Exhibit I-7? You've never seen
So
this before?
I've seen the exhibit, but reviewing the paper, I'm not sure.
Okay. According to you, this is not literature that would indicate that there was communication between the San Andres and the Grayburg at EMSU? Or you
I would
just
have
didn't
to-
remember this?
I would have to reread that and come to a conclusion, but
You haven't done that as part of your barrier work in this case?
I may have reviewed this, but I definitely didn't come to a conclusion that there was any communication between the San Andres and the Grayburg.
Here's another Chevron paper. A portion of the water production is probably attributable to communications of zones 4 and 5 with the lower Grayburg and San Andres aquifers. Although siliclastics between each zone generally prevent vertical communication, in some localized areas of the field, they do not act as permeability barriers. When the barriers break down in the lower Grayburg members, the prolific San Andres aquifer can influx into the oil productive horizons, resulting in large volumes of water production. Again, did you read this as part of your literature search before coming in with barrier opinions?
I did read this, yes.
And why does this not satisfy you that authors had already written about communication?
This was represented in the AGU, not the EMSU.
It actually comes out of the technical committee report from 1983, yes, on the EMSU.
I do not. I see the technical committee report of the Arrowhead Grayburg Lee unit on this.
Can you explain as a matter of geology why communication would occur between the Grayburg and the San Andres and the AGU, but not in the EMSU?
It's a different geologic setting.
With respect to the critiques of Dr. Buckwalter's model, isn't it the position of Goodnight and its experts that Dr. Buckwalter should have mapped the entire east half of New Mexico and about half of Texas too, as part of a simulation?
I have no clue.
You haven't seen, in terms of the critiques of Dr. Buckwalter and how big his simulation model should have expanded geographically, not something you've looked at?
I've reviewed his model and have some criticisms of it. I don't know that that specific thing represents my opinion.
As we continue to talk about literature, I asked you earlier about PhDs and papers written by Dr. Lindsay. Here he's talking on Arrowhead Grayburg. And do you see the areas where he indicates bottom water?
Yes, I see where he points that out.
Was this part of your literature search?
I did review this.
And this isn't good enough for you to indicate as a matter of geology that there would be communication between the Grayburg and the San Andres?
Absolutely not.
Were you in here for Dr. Lindsay's testimony?
Yes.
An additional paper written by Dr. Lindsay, evidence of communication between San Andres and Grayburg here. In a few well locations in Arrowhead, there was a problem with the upper San Andres formation bottom water production that ascended up into the Grayburg strata via vertical plumes of water along swarms of narrow, short-spaced fractures. And then at page 1004, these plumes of vertically oriented upper San Andres formation bottom water only affected small areas in the unit, and in most cases only affected one well, though mapped as though it was affecting the larger area. Similar vertically oriented plumes of upper San Andres formation water were also encountered in individual wells further north in Eunice Monument South Unit, EMSU, and EMSU-B. Was this part of your literature search?
Yes.
And this wasn't good enough for you either.
I had a completely different explanation that I think is more reasonable, geologically based.
From Dr. Lindsay?
Correct.
I'm going to try to get over to your slide presentation now. Actually, I'll show this real quick before we leave this. We've also prepared a demonstrative from an aerial perspective, plotting the Goodnight top of San Andreas against the Empire top of San Andreas against the pressure losses. Have you done any work like this to try to compare where are the tops against where are the alleged lost circulation events?
No.
In terms of the geology here, I'm at your slide 2, and actually I just want the commission to know what work you did versus didn't do. Here at slide 1, you did not create this, did you? This was somebody else?
I pushed the buttons to create that, yes.
Where did you get this?
This is created out of Drilling Info, or now Enverus.
Okay, so that was a map from Drilling Info.
Yes.
The second slide with the geology, did you didn't create this either, did you?
No.
In terms of the idea of migration pathways, if this was really a migration pathway, how could oil have gotten into these little tiny pores with low permeability? If this was a failed migration pathway, how did that oil saturate long enough to get into these little tiny pores in incredibly low permeability situations?
Well, the alleged hydrocarbon that might be in those ores, I'm not sure I can explain how that got there. But the migration pathways of oil generated from the Wolf Camp and migrating through the entire system is very complicated. So,
Did any of the oil in the Graybird come from the Wolf Camp, or you don't know?
I would assume that also came from the Wolf Camp.
Would it have passed through the San Andreas, or you don't know?
I'm assuming it would have passed through the Grayburg horizontal migration paths.
Now, my question is, how does it get from the Wolf Camp to the Grayburg? Did it go through the San Andreas?
Complicated migration paths. I do not believe it had to go through the San Andreas.
Now, my question here is a matter of scientific probability. Did it go through the San Andreas?
The oil that's in the Grayburg, I don't believe so.
Can you explain to the commission how with scientific probability, the oil got from the Wolf Camp to the Grayburg, or you don't know?
I do not know.
I'm gonna move over to your rebuttal. Actually, this is the original testimony. I have a question at slide 5. As we talk about geology, did you do any rock outcrop work in this case? Did you look at any rock outcrops?
No.
You know that Dr. Lindsay and Dr. Trenholm both have done rock outcrop studies as part of studying this area.
Yes.
Wouldn't evaluation of the rock outcrop study be useful to identifying the rock facies within the facies model here at EMSU that Dr. Davidson used?
I did not do anything with facies, and none of my analysis had facies.
But you know that Dr. Davidson did, right?
Correct.
And in terms of all of the petrophysical analysis that you used then to calculate oil in place, that all came from Dr. Davidson and his facies model.
Correct.
Doesn't that give you concern as a geologist that your work is a derivative and 100% reliant upon what was done by Dr. Davidson, and he didn't look at any outcrop and didn't actually study the core, describe the core before putting together a model that was 100% predicated on facies?
What was the question in there?
With you relying on that data, and again, all of your outputs, so that the commission understands that if we move and now start talking about oil in place,
Okay.
100% of your work is dependent on the petrophysical work done by Dr. Davidson. True?
Well, I reviewed Dr. Davidson's and everyone else's petrophysical analysis, so I incorporated all of that data. And trying to validate data, I think actual physical data contradicts most of those petrophysical analysis except Dr. Davidson's. So in validating his model, his facies model, however he interpreted it, seemed to match the actual physical data. So I think I validated Dr. Davidson's model as being the most accurate of any of the ones that I was presented.
Matched what actual data?
The core data.
But you didn't describe or study the core. You never looked at either it and you didn't look at the R bell core at all, did you?
No, what you do is you correlate to the actual quantitative data, the measurements from the core data, the oil saturations and the porosities, much like the other petrophysical analyses either should have done or tried to do.
But if you're working off of if you've chosen at the petrophysical level to base all of your work off of a facies model, the geology is all the more important in terms of actually looking and describing the core and studying rock outcrops so that you know what rock do I actually have in this particular environment.
I would say no. The actual validation of the petrophysical model is comparing it to the actual physical data that you have. And if it doesn't match that, you can't use it. And if it does match it, that's the more valid analysis.
What physical data did you have in the 679 well beneath the core?
We had none.
Now, coming back to, I just want to make sure we've got this in the bumpers. With respect to your work, I know now you mentioned that you looked at New Tech and you looked at Ops Geologic. But in terms of your calculation of original oil in place that you've offered testimony written and verbal to this commission over, that was all derivatives off of what Dr. Davidson did.
Correct.
So I understand that you now say, well, I looked and criticized Ops Geologic, I looked and I criticized New Tech, but so there's no vagueness here. If Dr. Davidson's work, petrophysical work, is wrong, then your oil in place values are incorrect. True?
Well, I would say all of our interpretations of anything are wrong. It's a most likely realistic case, and there could be sensitivities around there. But like anything, making a statement of 100% factual, this is the actual answer, I can't say that, but I can say from my professional opinion that Dr. Davidson's is the most reliable, most likely case of oil in place in the EMSU within the depth intervals that I evaluated.
I've forgotten my question now, but I don't think that was an answer to it. I'm just trying to take this down into pieces so that we understand. So you're saying all of the petrophysical work by everybody is wrong, right? You're saying it's a matter of how wrong?
I'm saying I looked at all the analysis and I compared it to the actual physical data, And there was a large discrepancy in most of the analysis. The one that was closest to, which I also said that I think he may have overestimated oil in place also, was Dr. Davidson's. And so I used that as an indication of the oil in place and the potential recoveries of the oil in these intervals.
Okay. Well, you were off by a factor of 100% just because you didn't know how to read the data, right? That
Objection, badgering the witness.
It's argumentative. You want to rephrase or withdraw?
Well, when you talk about, I mean, it's a real question. When you talk about, it's a matter of, who's accurate, who's not accurate, and that you've somehow looked at all this and you're the final say on it. I mean, literally, in terms of the data you looked at, you swore under oath to this commission and put your seal on an opinion that you've said is off by over 100%.
Correct.
Objection. Mr. Knights testified that he identified and corrected the record.
It has been asked and answered.
Well, let me try to see if I have these steps right on what happened. You remember you came up with the original saturation of 30% was what you wanted to use.
30% cutoff, yes.
And that was back when you were off by the factor that just in timing on these errors, that was when you were off by 100% because you misread the intervals.
Yes, the paper submitted was 100% wrong.
And we visited before the break on why did you change it? And you said, well, I did what everybody else, the rest of the club was doing, I think was a phrase you had. Is the real reason you moved the 30% to 20% is because you had already had the volumes crammed down so low? When you realized the 100% mistake, you had to chop it in half. And then the 30% was an effort to just add some volumes back so that you didn't get left out of this hearing.
Objection, argumentative.
I'm sorry. It is argumentative. I'll sustain it.
Was part of the reason that you went from 20% saturation to 30% saturation because now you realized, oh no, I have to chop my oil in half because I read the depth interval wrong?
No.
But again, just before we leave this, so that the commission understands what all of your outputs that you did not amalgamate from New Tech and Opsgeologic and Dr. Davidson and take the best of the three. You threw out Opsgeologic, you threw out New Tech. All of your work is a 100% derivative of what Dr. Davidson did.
Correct.
And he chose a facies model. He had all sorts of different models he could have adopted. He chose a facies model.
I believe so, yes.
Rock facies is a concept of geology. This is lithology. This is something that's happening 4,400 feet beneath the surface of the earth.
Correct.
And so I'm just asking you as a geologist, where all of your work and your oil in place volumes is dependent on Dr. Davidson, and he chose a facies model, and he didn't describe the core. He didn't look at the core. He didn't use the R bell core. He didn't do a rock outcrop study. That doesn't give you concern?
Not at all. Basically, when you look at an analysis, you don't decide how they did it, but you validate it on the results. And Jim Davidson matched the core better, and the 5 offset wells that he had blind tests on corroborated the information on each of those other fields. I really enjoyed the Seminole one where he showed that the swept zone that's been CO2 flooded for 40 years still had between 15 and 25% residual oil saturation, indicating that a residual oil saturation matched his volumetric estimates. And I think all those validation points pointed to that Dr. Davidson's is the most accurate analysis that I had at the time.
You talked about sensitivities a moment ago. Did you run a sensitivities analysis?
In my summary, I've done sensitivity analysis in my head, basically using the net pay scenarios that I use for the 4, 7, and 10% porosity. And I show percentage-wise how that would have affected the oil in place in the EMSU, and also how it broke down the reservoir quality on how much was really high quality, medium quality, and low quality. And so I ran those scenarios.
So the question is, did you run or perform here a sensitivity analysis that you would put the Netherlands Sewell stamp on as a sensitivity analysis, yes or no?
I ran, well, yes.
Where do we find that in your papers?
The slide that has the OPS permeability, the different porosity cutoffs,
Okay,
those variations.
where you reported OPS's volumes?
Correct. Their net pay analysis. That was based on a porosity cutoff, which in fact, all four of the, or five of the petrophysical analysis had a very similar porosity. And so using that, I didn't feel I had to do a separate porosity net pay analysis for each of the things, but those percentages were probably equivalent for each of the sensitivities. So we had 30% of rock and very high quality, greater than 10%. We had another third of the rock that's medium, about 1 millidarcy and above. And then you had another third using the OPS geologic model at about 4% porosity by their porosity calculations. That was basically another third of the rock.
Okay, and so, and I truly don't know this. Did you say, did you discuss sensitivity analysis anywhere in here, or is this something you said you did in your head?
Did not have a writing of sensitivity analysis.
Okay, so if the commissioners want to see a sensitivity analysis, they're not going to find that in any of your written statement, are they?
They can look at the net pay analysis that I have in my summary comments that shows that I have 4.5, 7, and 10% as different levels of quality of rock divided in the reservoir.
With respect to that sensitivity analysis that you've now testified to that you performed, was you said OPS geologic was part of that analysis?
Part of the analysis.
Of the sensitive, their 4% porosity would be part of your sensitivity analysis?
Yes, I showed what their volume differences would have been from a net pay consideration using different porosity cutoffs, because they had a tendency to just use saturation as a cutoff. That is an industry standard. The most common use of net pay scenarios is to use a permeability related to a porosity cutoff to define reservoir quality.
Even in an instance here where porosity and permeability do not directly track with one another, and there's variability in porosity with permeability?
Correct.
Now I want to add on with respect to OPS geologic on the sensitivity analysis, ultimately, does that land at their volumes? When you're saying you've performed a sensitivity in your head.
Yeah, well, their maps are their 100% volumes.
Okay.
And if I used a 7%, that would be reduced by another 32%. And if I used 10%, that would be reduced by another 30%. So basically on the OPS geologic model, I have a third of their rock is very high quality, high porosity. A third of their rock is medium. And basically that was Jim Davidson's cutoff that he used. And then OPS geologic has another third of their oil in place in the low porosity that is relatively lower quality, low porosity based on a porosity cutoff. And that's where most of their oil is, in the low porosity.
And so I'm just trying to get back to, as you talk about the sensitivity analysis that you said you ran in your head, is OPS geologic then in that analysis? And I mean, you just testified, you said that's part of my sensitivity, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Would that be the high case?
It would be an unrealistic with a high case, yes.
But you said you use that for your sensitivity analysis here, correct?
I use that as a porosity to get to a net pay distribution. I'm not sure the question.
Yeah, and so to the extent that you're in a sensitivity analysis, would OPS geologic then be your high case?
No.
What would be your high case in the sensitivity?
At the moment, it would be some kind of distribution around Dr. Davidson's oil in place.
Where would we see that in either your handouts or your written testimony?
You do not have that.
Okay. So I'm just trying to take this in pieces. On the sensitivity, I mean, what I have in my mind as a lawyer, not a scientist, there's going to be a high case and a low case, right?
Yes.
In a middle case, yeah?
Yes.
And I asked you, did you run a sensitivity? And you eventually said you did. And I said, what is your sensitivity? And you said, OPS geologic and Dr. Davidson. I mean, is it that simple?
Yeah, no, it's not that simple.
What would then be the high case in your sensitivity that you ran?
There's just not enough data to be comfortable with a high side case. I mean, right now, the most likely case is Dr. Davidson's and some semblance of distribution around that. Right now, if I had to do off the top of my head, I'd say 10% up and 10% down.
You said off of Dr. Davidson, and I'm not going to continue to beat the horse about the facies model, but did you actually discuss in your original testimony, actually your original testimony, a 4% porosity cutoff?
Could you answer that? Ask that question again?
Yeah. Did you originally start this project at a 4% cutoff? 4% porosity?
I don't understand. Did I start the process?
To it.
I was using whatever was provided to me. So OPS used, I think, 4% effective porosity as their cutoff. Jim Davidson used a 7% effective porosity for his cutoff. To tell you the truth, I don't remember what New Tech used.
So I'm in right now in your rebuttal report, and I'm going to try to zoom in because I want you to explain what this is and why this is. Do you see the paragraph that begins in SAI's analysis of oil saturation?
Yes.
So in SAI, that's you and your
Correct.
company, right?
Yes.
In SAI, that would also be Dr. Davidson, right?
Correct.
We used a consistent porosity cutoff of 4% to evaluate the reasonableness of the 3 petrophysical models to conduct an empirical analysis. Why did you use a 4% porosity cutoff?
For consistency. So I was doing a variation on oil saturation. And so if I used a consistent oil saturation, but an inconsistent porosity, all of these petrophysical analyses couldn't be compared appropriately. So I took all of the lowest porosity that somebody used as 4% on ops. I said, okay, let's just use that as a common porosity cutoff so that I am just looking at the variability of saturations.
Oh, I'm now moving over to your original report. As we come back to this concept of facies, which is what Dr. Davidson's work is based off of, there was a lot of discussion yesterday on shallow water environment versus deep water environment. You say here, oil entered the San Andres aquifer and migrated through a complicated porosity system to create several isolated reservoirs with varying compositions of salinity and hydrocarbon saturations. These reservoirs include both mobile oil and productive fields across the CBP and residual oil scattered along the migration pathways. I'm actually at the wrong spot. Get over. So, sorry about that. Here we go. This is what I wanted to focus on. And for reference, this is out of your revised original report. The EMSU is located along the northwestern edge of the CBP as shown in Figure 1. The unit is composed of the producing Grayburg Reservoir and the underlying San Andres Aquifer. And again, in the testimony, we've had a great difficulty today on, you've said you don't know what San Andres is, you don't know what Grayburg is, but through it, when the commissioners go back and read these reports, they're going to see that you speak of San Andres and Grayburg all over the place, don't you?
I probably is inconsistent. My definition of San Andres, I tried to be consistent at relating it to the Goodnight injection interval, which some of the people call the lower San Andres.
If I take the tops off of the various logs here and just ask you to show the commission, I have some logs that don't have tops on them,
Mm-hmm.
to show them where, according to you, in that particular log, the San Andres is versus the Grayburg? Would you be able to do that?
Not particularly well, or I could do it as inconsistently as everybody else. But what I could do is define the top of the lower San Andres where the Goodnight injection level is at basically some of the tops of the major lost circulation zones, because I think that is a definitive indication of a significantly different reservoir quality and size and component that is isolated and separate and different from the shallower reservoirs.
But I've just shown you off of the plot here that's at figure 4 that the lost circulation zones are all over the place. You are not going to testify that wherever there's a lost circulation zone that becomes
A
the
perm
San
barrier.
Andres and the Grayburg. Are you?
No, it's a perm barrier, and it creates separate reservoirs.
My question was San Andres versus Grayburg. You said you would go to where the mud losses are. You're not telling the OCC that it's your geology opinion that you would pick San Andres Formation from Grayburg Formation based on wherever the mud loss occurred, is it?
Again, anyone that uses a formation as a nomenclature, it's very arbitrary. I use depths and reservoir quality. And the reservoir quality in the lower San Andres is distinctly determined by, number one, the little lost circulation zone, but then again, the water supply wells that show it has a tremendous permeability and a large, significantly large aquifer. And then the water injection that shows a significant amount of water that's injected at very high permeabilities with very little pressure changes, that also indicates it's a very large aquifer.
Would you agree with me that the San Andres and the Grayburg are all in the EMSU? Those are both in the EMSU, right?
They are both, depending on, yeah. Yes.
And the unit interval is all of the Grayburg and all of the San Andres, correct?
I think so, yes.
So coming back to page 5 of your original report, these formations were deposited in typical marine and restricted marine environments, with most of the EMSU deposition occurring in a predominantly shallow water carbonate ramp environment. I read that correctly?
Correct.
Is that still your opinion?
Yes, it's a little indistinctive because it doesn't supply the actual depths, but for the significant of the shallow water is in the Grayburg, actually the producing interval.
And so if we just took one of these logs as an example, pick that one. Where is the upper San Andres and where is the lower San Andres?
Well, from the preponderance of data, I would suggest that the top is somewhere equivalent to the large lost circulations that we have across this in probably 8 of the 11 wells. So probably somewhere this depth.
If you're picking off of the lost circulation intervals, you can tell the commission that the depth of formation is going to change by hundreds of feet, isn't it?
I don't think so. I think most of them are around -700 feet at the top of where the major lost circulation and injection zones are. Both of those indicate that it's a large aquifer from a permeability standpoint and uniquely different than any of the overlying Grayburg or the upper San Andres reservoirs above that, like Jim Davidson's either high gamma ray or that -500 to -700 feet, which I define as kind of a demilitarized zone, that I think most of the perm barriers within that separate the two reservoirs, and everything above -500 is completely separate and just.
So your testimony was that the loss events are happening at 700 feet subsea?
Approximately that depth,
Okay.
maybe a little different.
Okay, well, I have this plotted here at subsea, and based on the actual data, I'd like you now to explain, and here I'll give you the legend. The green is going to be mud loss depth. Can you help me with how this would look like 700 feet subsea? So we have the EMSU 628. That one's at 1,039 feet. We have the Ernie Banks. That one's at 970 feet.
What are the three numbers?
We have the EMSU 713. That's at 932 feet. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand where. How are you saying these all happened at 700 feet subsea?
Mr. Hearing Officer, I'm confused by what I'm seeing on the screen. I don't know what these numbers are or where they came from, who created this document. And so I guess I would object to it for being used for cross-reference, cross-examination, because I don't know what any of these numbers are or where they came from.
More foundation, Mr. Waymeyer.
Have you ever tried to actually place on a map or a plot where, well by well, where the actual subsea depths are in each of the wells that are under study here? The lost circulation.
The lost circulation
Yeah.
zone on a map? I believe I have.
So again, you're the one that started with 700 subsea feet. If the data is that in the EMSU 628, the loss occurred at 1,039 feet, we can agree that that is not 700 feet, right?
Correct.
If the SWD N11-1, the loss circulation was at 1,051 subsea, that is not 700 feet, is it?
Correct.
In the EMSU 713, if it happens at 932 subsea, that's not 700 feet, is it?
Yes. Yes.
In the Ernie Banks SWD, if it is lost at 970, that's not 700 feet, is it?
Correct.
If in the TED 28, it happens at 1,013, that's not 700 feet, is it?
Correct.
In the Nolan Ryan, if it's at 1,043, that's not 700 feet, is it?
No, they're all below 700 feet.
And so again, the idea that we would choose the place that a loss of circulation happened to define San Andreas versus Grayburg, in terms of being able to correlate that across this field, there's no way to do that, is there?
Well, you wouldn't use one piece of data to define a reservoir.
So you would agree that if you're picking tops off of just circulation losses, that would not be a valid scientific basis or engineering basis to pick?
That data only, no.
Now, coming back to get back to your paper. Can you get us back to his paper? Do you have that by chance? Yeah. There we go. I think I've got it now. I'm just trying to get back to your paper. So we're back to your paper here at page 5. These formations were deposited in typical marine and restricted marine environments, with most of the EMSU deposition occurring in a predominantly shallow water carbon ramp environment. Here at EMSU, first, do you stand by that testimony? EMSU is predominantly shallow water.
Yes.
Have you done any work here to show where shallow water would transition, if at all, to deep water?
No.
Okay, so the best we have is that after your geology work, the EMSU is predominantly shallow water. And if the commission wanted to know anywhere not shallow water, nothing you have an opinion on or anything you've done as a matter of geology. True?
Predominantly, yes.
Now, tell the commission about the importance of being in the EMSU and St. Andrews being in a shallow water environment. What does that mean about rock type?
It's very variable and generally thinner deposits.
You would expect less mud in that environment, wouldn't you?
Yes.
You would expect more oil in that environment, wouldn't you?
Uh,
In a high
More oil.
energy, in a higher energy shallow water environment as compared to a low energy deep water environment.
There would be, there'd be higher porosity.
Which in this instance would equate to more oil in place.
Yes, above the oil water contact, it should.
Now, as we visit on rock facies, if you're shallow water, you would be more grain dominated and less mud dominated, wouldn't you?
You would be more likely to be grain dominated versus mud dominated.
Now, the idea, we've talked about how much depth we have of 679 core in the EMSU. If we're below that, and you're talking about rock properties off of a log, you're going to need a spectral gamma, aren't you?
Spectral gamma is very useful.
Because that's the only way that you're going to be able to tell, am I looking at thorium? Is this gamma reacting to potassium? Is it reacting to uranium? Yes.
Yes.
In this instance, did you have any spectral gamma whatsoever within the EMSU boundaries?
Not within the boundaries of the EMSU.
And so again, coming back to your work being based off of Dr. Davidson's, does it give you concern as a geologist that a facies model was developed in a shallow water environment in which rock typing was picked without having any spectral gamma to differentiate out of uranium, thorium, and potassium?
Well, we did have spectral gamma rays in nearby offset wells to the southeast and to the north that were used in my evaluation to indicate that those were actually uranium. And I think extrapolating that over the EMSU is a reasonable geologic assumption.
How far away were those wells?
I would say maybe 2-3 miles.
Might the rock outcrop study be more valuable?
100 miles away now.
With respect, as we talk about uncertainty in this particular instance, would you give me that in terms of picking rock types here, in the absence of core, in the absence of spectral gamma, that certainly reasonable folks could disagree over one level of rock quality pick? For example, moving from a wax stone to a mud dominated pack stone, or a mud dominated pack stone to a grain dominated pack stone, that there could at least be one facies of rock change, reasonable uncertainty there that you could move.
I guarantee that some people would call things differently, much like the nomenclature at the top of the St. Andrews.
And so is that, I'm not
No.
fussing with you, but is that a yes?
Yes.
And in this instance, if all you did was move over Dr. Davidson's rock facies and assume a level of one better rock type, you with me so far in the assumption?
Mhm.
You know that you then move to oil saturations that look very similar to the ones prepared by Ops Geologic and NewTek, don't you?
I'm not sure that's the case, but if it would be the case, then those would contradict the actual core data in the rest of the model. So I would go to Jim Davidson and say, this model's not working.
If you'll listen to my question,
Okay, sorry.
we've already covered that you can agree that reasonable minds, reasonable science and engineering, reasonable science minds could disagree here about one level of rock type. There's at least that amount of uncertainty here, according to you.
Okay, I'll go with that assumption.
And here, if you move Dr. Davidson's rock type over by just one level, do you know how closely that would compare to what Ops Geologic did?
No.
Would you expect it to look very similar then to what Ops Geologic did?
No.
Why?
Because the oil in place numbers were dramatically higher than I would have expected
With
relative to the core data.
Well, you mentioned core, and we know we don't have core in deep into the lower San Andreas. But with respect to the court, you understand that Ops Geologic actually made corrections for to eliminate certain of the core plots because it would have led to an unreasonable end value.
I think I'm aware of that, yes.
And we saw, in terms of just fussing with Ops Geologic, if we looked at the end value, I understand that Dr. Davidson wouldn't agree he arrived at an end value. But some of his plots were actually, they were all the way over to 10 on his end value. If you looked at his analysis and where it fell on the plots.
Objection, Mr. Waymar's testifying.
Well, let's hear the end of the question first. Mr. Waymire, in the interest of maybe saving time, how about rephrasing it?
Absolutely. And I think we're on the same page. Yep. I apologize for the long question. I'll strike that. So the question is, I understand that Dr. Davidson didn't use an Archie's equation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he didn't use M and N values, did he?
No.
Ops Geologic chose a modified Archie's equation with a variable M and N. Yes.
Correct.
Have you seen that done in the petrophysical world?
Yes.
Okay, so that in terms of them varying
Yeah.
M and N on a modified Archie's, this is not something crazy.
No.
Scott Burkhead isn't a nut. This is something that's industry
Sharp
standard.
guy.
Okay. Now, with Dr. Davidson's work, even though he didn't use an M and an N, you can determine what the M and the N would be off of his plots and work, can't you?
Dr. Davidson couldn't.
And in fact, some of those N values reach all the way to 10, don't they?
I do not know, but that would not surprise me.
Which would be even higher than the N value used by Ops Geologic, which got to about 9 in certain places.
I would assume that's correct.
Did you do a study of the critical water saturation? Basically a look at how much water can even move if the Netherlands soil analysis is correct?
I did not do a study, no.
Okay, and so in terms of telling the commission about what percentage of your water saturations would be critical or irreducible, that's not something you've done, not something you would be able to talk about.
Well, I mean, I'm exposed to residual oil saturations and residual water saturations just in industry, but not specifically here.
Yeah, so if they wanted to know, based on the majority of Dr. Davidson's rock typing, how much of that water, and those oils, I mean, those water saturations, they go up they immediately go to 92%, don't they?
Yes.
And so just by choosing that rock type in that facies model, you can't get more than 8% oil into the model simply as a matter of rock typing. Isn't that right?
That's probably correct.
And so you pick the rock type. So now we know we've got, just based on the rock type, and again, no spectral, no core. We know you've looked at least 92% immediately has to be water.
Objection, mischaracterizing the testimony. Mr. Mr. Knights testified that they did have spectral and they did use spectral in their analysis.
Overruled.
You want me to re-ask it?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's an interruption. I totally get it. So you've looked enough at Dr. Davidson's facies model. You know that based on the rock type he selects for the majority of the lower San Andreas reservoir formation, that just by the rock type, it only allows a maximum of 8% oil in because it's going to put at least 92% water saturation into it, isn't it?
Objection, mischaracterizes the testimony, Dr. Davidson.
Overruled.
Looking at that SC chart, some of those curves where they hit the very high resistivity index, I think those lower values to the right maybe in that 7 to 8%. And so
Right.
if that was the lithology that was defined, then that would be a maximum saturation.
Right. And the people that define lithology would be geologists, right?
Correct.
And Dr. Davidson's not a geologist.
Well, I would amend that geologist petrophysicist, because petrophysicists distinctly do more lithology work than I do.
Did he do any lithology work here?
Using log characteristics, yes.
Log characteristics off of triple combo, which really, again, just in terms of keeping credibility with this commission, doesn't it all just come back to his gamma ray reading? If the gamma ray spikes, he says this is non-reservoir.
That was a significant data input into his analysis, yes.
And so as soon as a gamma ray spikes, it immediately becomes non-reservoir. And as a practical matter, just making this simple, at that point, you're going to have 92% plus water saturation. You can't put in more than 8% oil. True?
On some of those curves, that is correct.
And as we talk about some of those curves, the majority of the rock in the lower St. Andrews that he's chosen would be waxstone or worse.
Objection, mischaracterizes the evidence. Dr. Davidson testified they didn't use waxstone in his model.
Yeah. Do you have more foundation, maybe something to show him or refer him to specifically?
Mr. Knights and I are on the same page. He knows where these rock types end up. You know where you've looked at the facies model in terms of what rock you want to know as a geologist. What rocks has Dr. Davidson given me here, right?
Yeah, well, basically, I don't really care what rocks they are. I look at the results of the analysis and I compare it to the actual hardcore data that I have and see if that makes sense or seems reasonable.
What hardcore data did you have in the EMSU?
Well, the EMSU, the 679 core data, and in the Graybird, I had a lot of production data.
Now, the Grayberg is that was produced conventionally.
Correct.
No,
Mr. Hearing Officer, Mr. Knights was cut off. He was answering a question and Mr. Waymeyer cut him off.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that.
I did too. I'm happy for him. I didn't cut you off. Go ahead.
I don't actually remember what I was talking
Let's not,
about.
stop
I'd be
a
happy
second.
for you to ask.
Let's not get into the same situation we got into yesterday. Remember, it's a radio transmission. You guys give each other time, okay?
I've enjoyed our visit. I think you and I are on the same page more frequently than Mr. Rankin. But so as we come back to I said, hey, look, if you're the geologist, you're doing this work, first thing you're going to want to know, what rocks has my petrophysicist given me? Fair?
I would ask Jim, what rocks are there?
What did he tell you?
As you know, Jim can be very loquacious. So it was long diatribes of why these rocks are what I've determined them to be. And I always enjoy my conversations and learn something every time I talk to him.
Did you ever get an answer on what rocks are these?
The ones that were in his model. So he actually never output a model of this foot is this rock type.
Okay, so if the commission wants to know, and I'm not being a wise guy with it, I promise. If the commission wants to know, when I went to go do my oil in place estimations, I asked Dr. Davidson, what kind of rock do I have here? Do you know? Yes or no?
Not foot by foot, but basically the deeper water, a little more on the mud side than the grainstone side.
Where did he call deep water?
Deep water is probably throughout the system, but predominantly lower in the Sprayberry was deep water and shallower above in the upper St. Andrews, above that hot gamma ray. That was primarily lower.
I think we just moved southeast quite a bit, not Sprayberry, St. Andrews.
Oh, did I say Sprayberry?
Yeah, that's okay.
St. Andrews.
Okay. And so the rock types, the best let me take it in two pieces. First, would you agree that whatever rock type was the predominant rock in his facies model, you're a little bit unclear on that right now as you sit in this chair?
Correct. On a foot by foot basis, yes.
And not being a wise guy, but is it a little odd that the geologist would be asking the educated engineer what type of rocks are these, as opposed to you doing the work on the front end to assist the petrophysicist with this is the lithology that you should expect in this particular environment. This is deep water, this is shallow water, this is what we need to be looking at from outcrop.
Not at all.
Now, you said you checked what he did against, and I can't remember, I don't want to misquote you, direct data or the
Direct-
concrete,
Direct physical evidence.
direct
Physical evidence.
physical evidence. How did you check his lower San Andreas? What direct physical evidence did you have? Was that just Grayberg?
That's a good question. Yes, there is the only direct physical evidence we have in the lower San Andreas is the reservoir quality by the saltwater supply wells and the injection wells, indicating permeability, reservoir quality, and reservoir dimensions.
But again, this isn't rock type. This is just going to be a gamma log,
Correct.
which comes back to, as I talk about, couldn't we all agree here amongst reasonable people that the rock facies could be off by a level of 1?
Okay.
Now, returning to just the water saturations, because I want to keep the forest in view here. The majority of the rock that Dr. Davidson's model selected was mud-dominated packstone or worse, right?
Potentially, I'm not sure.
And well, you've seen the plots on the graph, right?
Yeah.
And you know that by making that selection, even if you moved over to mud-dominated packstone, you have 80% water saturation right off the bat, don't you?
Yes, high water saturations.
And which to the other side of the 1- equation means you could maximum
Low.
have maybe 20% residual oil, right?
Correct.
Through just the facies selection.
Correct.
And then in the modeling that y'all selected, if there was not at least 20% oil saturation, 0 credit for oil was then put into your model, correct?
The net pays, yes, it would be 0.
So it really gets this simple. If you're looking at this from the Netherlands-Sewell approach, Dr. Davidson makes his facies picks for the majority of the lower San Andreas.
Mhm.
And based on those facies picks, you have to start with 80% water or even more water. And based on that facies pick, you can not put enough oil in to get past the 20% threshold for your model to give that oil any credit for oil in place.
Correct.
I want to talk a little bit about the 20% threshold. You've seen literature, you've heard testimony from Steve Meltzer, from Dr. Trenum about ROZs.
Correct, yes.
And 20% is what they've spoken to as an acceptable threshold to get started at for an ROZ project.
As I understand it, it's the low side.
Yeah, but it's certain, it is
You
a
need-
oil saturation, and I'm so sorry, you go ahead.
No, and so you need at least 20% to make it reasonably viable. And that has to do with the residual oil saturations that are common in these rocks.
And again, just to keep this simple for my simple brain, this is not, you have to start at 40%, you produce it down to 20% residual oil and you stop. Based on their literature and their work on ROZs, 20% would be an acceptable place. That's a lot of oil down there. 20% would be an acceptable place to start.
To start as a minimum,
Yes,
if I had less than that, I wouldn't even consider it.
yes.
Yes.
Okay. And so your model literally kicks out all of the oil all of the residual oil that Dr. Trenum and Steve Meltzer would start an ROZ project at, doesn't it?
Yes.
And again, in terms of of the rock facies that's selected, in terms of moving from grain dominated pack stone over to a mud dominated pack stone, that comes down very much to shallow water environment versus deep water environment, correct?
Yes.
And
Correct
here,
size.
I asked you as the geologist, do you have any opinions to share? Could we go well by well, depth by depth, and you tell us where's shallow water environment, where's deep water environment? That's nothing you've done as a geologist, nothing you have opinions on, true?
I mean, I could have opinions if I reviewed something specifically.
You haven't done it
I
today.
have not done it now.
Additionally, all rock with less than 7% porosity, all of that oil is kicked out of the Netherlands soil model, isn't it?
Correct.
And so you understand that in ROZ development, oftentimes you will find some of your highest oil saturations in some of your lower porosity rock, right?
I don't know if I agree with that.
Do you have a position one way or the other?
In the better reservoirs, the higher oil saturation is in the higher quality rock. You get better recovery factor. But in some reservoirs, I could imagine that you would have more of the oil in the low permeability rock because it hasn't moved and won't move.
Under typical conventional environment, right?
Correct.
Coming back to Mother Nature's water flood. You heard Dr. Lindsay testify in here that as water pushes through here, mobile oil is going to be pushed out. What we have left is residual oil that clings to both pore throats and, pore volume with the water on the inside, waiting to be released through something that can reduce the viscosity, such as CO2.
Yes.
And so this comes back to, you understand that Scott Burkhead has testified here that what he's actually observed in core and what he's modeled is that oftentimes the higher saturations of oil occur in the lower porosity environments. True?
So yes.
But again, just in terms of keeping the big picture here for the commissioners, if it's below 7% porosity, we never get those volumes in your model. Those are all kicked out, right?
Correct.
You would agree with me that because we're not dealing in a conventional environment here, and this whole fuss is over tertiary, that through the injection of CO2, it is then possible to reduce the viscosity to recover the oil from these tight pore throats and from these pore volumes. True.
Yes, that is the concept.
In terms of oil wet versus mixed wet, there's been a lot of discussion about that. Is this an oil wet environment or a mixed wet, or might it be something in between?
I think it might be somewhere in between.
What does that, if you move from an oil wet environment over to a mixed wet environment, you with me on the assumption? What would that do to your modeling?
I'm not sure. I would defer to Dr. Davidson on that.
But before you came in and testified on volumes, you didn't ask him, did you model this off of oil wet versus mixed wet?
No.
But that certainly would change the volumes, wouldn't it?
I would defer to Dr. Davidson.
We're going to go back to your slideshow. While we're talking about ROZs, some of the recipe or the cookbook of ROZs, you're looking for things. No one's expecting mobile oil in an ROZ development. We can all agree on that.
Correct.
So, I mean, there's pages of testimony that I've read from the Goodnight witnesses about, golly, we've produced a gazillion barrels of water here and we have very little oil that's come up with it, right?
Objection, mischaracterization of the testimony.
Yeah, I don't remember golly being in any of the technical reports.
It's all my
Every
simple,
phrase.
all my simple mind can appreciate, understand. Have you read the other witness statements in the case?
Yes.
Has there been a lot of paper spent on, we've produced a whole lot of water, but we have very little oil?
Yes.
And for an ROZ development such as this one, that would be, if you're advising a client, you would tell them that's exactly what you'd expect, right?
No, I don't think so. I think the ESP and the changing in the reservoirs would anticipate being a significant indication that there was a significant ROZ there. So the concept that we don't produce any oil, so there must be oil there is, I don't think that's a positive statement.
No, I'm taking the opposite side of it.
Okay.
If somebody says, I've produced a lot of water and I don't have oil.
Yeah.
If they're here talking to you on ROZ, you would say that's normal. You would expect that.
Yes.
Okay. Additionally, and we can go log by log, but to the commissioner's cherry picking comment, we can go into actual logs and we can look at the mud loggers report. And in the lower San Andreas, you with me on what we're talking, deep in the San Andreas?
Deep in it.
We can find gas shows, we can find oil fluorescence, we can find odor. Those aspects of Dr. Trenum's recipe and cookbook are present in many of these logs, aren't they?
In many of the logs, in some instances, yes.
And additionally, off the top of my head, I know it's the 660 and I think it's the 658. Mr. Rankin will correct me on it. Those wells were tested with an ESP and an electric submersible pump. And those did, in the lower San Andreas, produce oil along with the salt water. There was mobile oil.
There was some mobile oil, yes.
And just the way oil works in the pore space and in those pore throats, if you're getting mobile oil, you know there has to be residual oil left behind. Right?
Correct. Yes.
Now, in terms of, and we may be able to work pretty quickly through this from here. In terms of just economics, you with me so far? I see in your papers that you kind of wave your hand over and go, this thing's not economic to fiddle with. Fair?
Yes.
But you haven't actually run any economic assessments here. You haven't looked at CapEx, OpEx, revenue anticipated.
Just on a screening basis.
Did something happen in your head that you woke up with, said, yeah, I looked at it.
Not sure.
Where would I see the work? If the commission wants to see an economic assessment, says you're going to be the economics guy, where in your papers do we see the economic assessment other than your say so?
It'd be the last two slides in my summary slide deck.
You've analyzed CapEx and OpEx?
I generally use the data that I've given, so I use the tall cotton data from there.
Let's talk about tall cotton. I'll get to the right slide here. Okay, this is your tall cotton slide?
Correct.
In terms of a recoverability factor, you haven't seen any miscibility studies here on any of the oil in the EMSU, have you?
No.
Is that something you'd want to see?
At this moment, no.
How about even oil compositional analysis? Ignore miscibility, just API of the oil and.
No.
Okay. Now, tall cotton Might it have been that oil was overstated in the first instance?
Yes.
And with respect to Tall Cotton, you've heard the testimony about they actually fracked into, they didn't want to wait. Kinder Morgan wanted the juice out of the squeeze faster. And so they fracked into the injector wells. Do you remember that testimony?
I remember the testimony, but I have no confirmation of that's actually what happened.
That's an interesting point in itself. So in terms of what happened at Tall Cotton, by way of the recoverability of the residual oil, you don't know what happened as a technical matter, do you?
I know the direct physical evidence is the performance, and the rate cum plot is 5 million barrels of data over 15 years, and a decline curve that gives me whatever happened in this instance, that's an estimated oil recovery that would accomplish from that development.
Just looking at this, and I know you're not an engineer, but looking at the graph on the bottom right, when you see a curve like that, would you expect that there was something from a technical engineering perspective that happened to that production?
Something happened to the production, yes.
That would be different than and not explained by somehow the oil just couldn't be, the EOR was no longer effective.
I really don't know exactly what that is, but I would suggest there's plenty of plausible explanations.
One of them being that they fracked the injector wells.
That would be something that might affect it.
Why would you supply the commission with this slide? As we talk about, you've only offered 24 slides, and it's important to get things right. Why would you give the commission testimony about Tall Cotton being a good analogy here without actually digging in to understand from a technical perspective what happened out there?
Well, I don't think that data is available publicly. So this is public data. This is the only ROZ isolated interval that I could even attempt to get somewhat close to a recovery factor. So I thought it was important to at least look at that data and come up with at least a screening perspective on what that recovery would be.
This slide, you showed, just for record reference, we're looking at your slide 13. You with me there?
Correct.
I'm not sure anybody knows what is Goodnight's position as to what Ops Geologic's average grain density was. What I think y'all are is the point of this fussing with what you think Ops Geologic's grain density is?
No, they have a ternary diagram that he suggested it was 2.9 for the dolomite end. I think if you're talking about his grain density, that would be the amalgamation of how much percentage of dolomite, how much percentage of sandstone, how much percentage of the other mineral interests. And you can get an average mean grain density of that. The only thing I was suggesting here is that he used 2.9 with a constant 20% anhydrite to get that up from the typical 2.87 grain density that would normally use for the dolomite component in his analysis.
Okay, I just don't want the commission to be left with any misimpressions. For example, on EMSU 679 core average matrix 2.83, is that grams over cubic centimeters?
Correct.
And you think Ops Geologic, and well, let me stop on that. That's an average, isn't it? 2.83 grams per cubic centimeter. Is that an average of what was measured in core?
Where? I'm not quite sure.
Trying to, oh, here, I can highlight it.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Okay. That's an average over the whole core, right?
Yes.
And Exxon, is Exxon a client of yours?
No.
The Exxon,
No.
They were at about 2.84 grains per cubic centimeter.
Correct.
What do you think Ops Geologic averages?
I do not know.
If you went back and averaged it and it was 2.835, could we all agree that that is incredibly reasonable and right in line with core and what Exxon came to?
It's still I think the 2.9 is a little high relative to industry standards, so I would use a 2.87 there. Recalculate his, see what it thing. I think it would reduce his 2.83 to maybe, I don't know.
But the core average is 2.83. Exxon came up with 2.84. If Opsiologic's average was not 2.9, whatever you speculate on, what was 2.835, you would agree that that's at least in line with core and in line with what Exxon came up with.
Yes.
What was the average grain density of Dr. Davidson's model?
Believe his dolomite density was 2.87, but I would defer to Dr. Davidson.
Higher than the average in core, higher than Exxon, and higher than what Opsiologic came up with. Correct.
Yeah, if that is correct, if that's what he used.
And we're just popping through these things to clean up, make sure I cover it. The zone B water on this slide 14,
Mhm.
so that the commission is clear that those arrows are not in this publication, are they?
Correct.
You said there's an influx of zone B water with the arrows off to the right.
The paper defined Edgewater Drive, and this is an indication that the high water contacts were about where the reservoir went below the contacts.
Where did the paper define Edgewater Drive as coming from?
From down dip.
Okay, is there anything in the paper that says water is entering in from the east?
No, that's an observation from this map.
An observation from you put the arrows on. The only thing on the map are the arrows that you added that would indicate water's coming from the east.
Well, all the hatchered areas are water that was present in there in 1934, 35, 36, and 37.
On what basis would you say that water came from the east?
Because it's right on the eastern edge of the map.
Okay. The and is this Grayberg that is being spoken of here?
This is Grayberg.
Have you not heard, again, you're the geologist, have you not heard the extensive testimony in here that the Grayberg pinches off to the east and that there's no water moving in or out from the east?
I've heard that it does get tighter and pinches out to the east.
In terms of literature saying here at EMSU, water is entering from the east, have you seen any such literature in the Grayberg?
No.
And again, so the commissions were you put the arrows coming in from the east, and the reason you put the arrows coming in from the east was because you found these little shaded spots in this diagram.
Correct.
When was that paper written?
1939.
Okay, so we've got over 80 years. I'm trying to do. I've heard an engineer one time say, "I never do public math." I thought that was probably a good thing. But over 80 years since the paper doesn't say the water's coming in from the east, but you've cited the paper here and you put the arrows on. In the geology, I guess I should ask that first. Geology says the water's not coming in from the east, right?
No, this is an observation.
And again, so that the commission understands before you put the arrows on here and brought it and swore to it, the observation you formed, give them the methodology you used in getting to that observation.
Yes, I think that's it. Correct.
And I'm sorry, let me re-ask it.
Yeah.
Data, methods, conclusions. If they want to know what the methodology you use to say water is entering into the Grayberg from the east, tell them your methodology.
Reviewing this document and seeing that the eastern flank had some anomalous early water.
Moving to the cartoon or whatever you want to call it above it, so that the commission's not misled, was the perm barriers were not in this publication, were they?
No, I highlighted those.
And neither was the little dotted line. I'm trying to follow this dotted line. Do you see if they wanted to?
Yes.
That's not in the paper. That's something you added, right?
Correct.
In perm barrier, is this where you used a 7% porosity to define this perm barrier?
No, they have little marks there.
Well, I want to ask you about the little marks. Make sure we're talking same thing. Are these the little marks you're talking about?
Yes.
Can you help the commission with where they would find the little marks that close the top of what you call the perm barrier?
Close the top of the perm barrier.
For it to be a barrier, it has to close on the top, right?
No, the perm barrier can be any layers in there. It's not the entire, you don't need an entire thickness. All you need is some,
Well, let's take it in pieces. First, I said the little dot, the tiny dotted line, that wasn't on the original. You added that.
correct.
And the colored perm barriers, that wasn't on the original document. You added that.
Correct.
And so then I asked, well, on what basis did you use your 7% porosity cutoff for this perm barrier? You said no.
No.
You said you did it based on the little lines that they drew, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
And so then I asked, are these the little lines? And I'm indicating here that there's lines that go along. You with me? Those are the lines you're speaking of.
Yes.
But the lines never literally at the top of what you've called a perm barrier, there are no lines. Why did you choose, if that was your methodology, how did you decide to call that a perm barrier and to effectively put in lines where the author of the cartoon chose not to?
For simplicity and geologic interpretation to close the polygon.
But the author of this that was trying to communicate something through the writing, can we agree that they intentionally did not close the top of that, of what you've now called perm barrier?
Yes.
Okay, so then on what scientific basis did you have to close it and then come in here and testify to the commission about it?
I did make a big assumption that the perm barrier on the east and west and the bottom have a top somewhere.
I think I'm at a place that I may be able to pass the witness, but I would like just 2 minutes to visit with my clients. If I could ask for the afternoon break now, but if that doesn't please the commission, I'm happy to proceed.
Chairman Rosato's, it is 2:50 PM. What's your thinking?
Yeah, if we need to take a break, let's take a break now. And we can come back.
All right, how about, is 10 minutes enough?
That's perfect.
Let's come
Thank you.
back at 3. Ms. Apodaca, are we ready in the back?
Yes, we are.
And Madam Court Reporter?
We're on the record.
All right, great. Mr. Waymeyer?
Thank you. On behalf of Empire, we pass the witness.
All right, Mr. Moander, I believe you'd be next.
Yes, Mr. Hearing Officer, OCD does not have questions for this witness and will pass the witness.
All right, Rice Operating, Mr. Beck.
Just a couple of questions. Mr. Knights, if I think you said that if Empire came to you, told you that they were going to drill down to the bottom of the San Andreas and spend 1.2 or something billion dollars on doing it, you would voice to them a concern about the injection going on at the bottom of the San Andreas, right?
I would give them one of many concerns, but that would be a minor one.
And what are those other concerns?
The actual presence, the volume of the presence, the thickness of the San Andreas is a negative. You can't CO2 flood an individual zone. You have to flood the entire section. Some of the perm barriers in there may also be an issue. I think the karsting that is evident from the lost drilling circulation and the amount of fluid water withdrawal from the water supply wells and the ability to inject, indicating that it's a significantly large volume of pore volume of water that is in the system that they would have to overcome to get to the alleged oil in the smaller porosity throats, trying to get that CO2 to contact that oil. I think those would be my major concerns.
Okay. And what if they came to you and said, okay, well, given those concerns, we're just going to exploit CO2 tertiary recovery, the potential ROZ above -700 subsea?
Yeah, I think -500 would probably be my estimate of where the current, if I was going to reclaim a unit, I would say -500 would be the base of the productive oil unit and the potential ROZs, and that anything developed up there would be isolated and separate from the deeper reservoir that's currently being injected from Goodnight.
And so when you say that it's isolated, I was a little bit confused about, seemed to be a lot of discussion on whether there was one significant barrier in the EMSU permeability barrier or whether there were multiples. At a base level, sounds like you're of the opinion that there's no communication above that permeability barrier below, right?
Correct.
Now explain to me how that is if there's not just one single permeability barrier that you found.
Well, there's evidence that there's a number of tight streaks in there that may be thin and laterally extensive. It's difficult to actually map it across the whole unit. But those tight streaks are perm barriers, but there's also other vertical impediments to vertical flow. So if you have a fluid trying to move up through the stratigraphic column and it hits a high perm streak, it's not going to go up, it's going to go laterally across there. And so there are indications of a lot of low perm barriers, but there are also some layers, including, as he pointed out, there's some lost circulation zones a little higher in the section. All those would be impediments to vertical fluid migration up into the above reservoirs.
And I think you went through this with Mr. Waymeyer, but you and part of your work, you advise banks on investing in new discovery projects of oil like this.
Yes.
And you do that for working interest owners, I think you said.
Working interest owners, companies, new developments, new business ventures, private equity firms, due diligence, screening of projects before someone goes to the next level of, is this worth kicking the tires?
And if one of those clients came in and asked you for the EMSU, is there a permeability barrier in communication between the disposal zone and the potential ROZ above it? What would you tell them?
I'd say there's plenty of evidence that I've seen that indicates that there's no communication between those two, and those are isolated and separate reservoirs.
All right. Thank you. Pass witness.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Mr. Suazo, Pilot Water Solutions.
No questions from pilot, Mr. Examiner.
All right, then we come to the commission. Anybody want to volunteer? I put Dr. Ampoma in the hot seat yesterday first. I can do that
I'll
again.
start.
All right.
I'll start. I don't have any questions.
All right. That makes it easy.
Yes.
All right. Well, I don't see any volunteers, so I'm just going to pick on Mr. Lampkin first. Do you have any questions, Mr. Lampkin, for Mr. Knights?
I do have a couple questions. Good afternoon, Mr. Knights. Thank you for your testimony. So with regards to the correlation of the wells that had anomalous water production volumes, did you look into whether or not those wells were perforated across the bedding planes that you hypothesize are the conduits to fluid flow?
Yes.
Was that in one of your figures, or is that in your testimony somewhere? Or?
In the testimony, I think it's in my rebuttal testimony on page 5. I discussed that 239 well pretty in specific detail on where it was perfed and where it was drilled deeper.
Was that the only well that you analyzed?
That's the only well that I went into detail on.
Was that the only well that you found was perforated across that bedding plane?
That was the only one I investigated in detail, since that was the largest anomalous thing that most people pointed to.
Okay. Would you, other than potential communication, vertical communication between the San Andres and the Grayburg, can you think of any other possible explanation as to why you would see a pressure reduction in the San Andres prior to oil being produced from that zone?
I think the only one would be the early production in the San Andres of the 7 barrels up till 1984 before the water flooding actually started being pervasive in the Central Basin Platform.
Was there any consideration made to a poroelastic effect causing a pressure drawdown in the San Andres from the removal of reservoir fluids in the Grayburg Formation?
No, I did not consider that.
Okay. I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lampkin. Dr. Ampoma.
Thank you, Mr. Knight, for your testimony. I do have a couple of questions for you. If we can have your slides up, that would be much useful to me. Now, my first question to you is, Mr. West talked about Empire using 18% recovery factor based on Seminole as an analogous to, let's say, the EMSU. Can you comment on that 18%?
I think basically the reservoir quality of the MSU is significantly less than the Seminole, and I don't think that's a very good analogy at all. Seminole is a relatively good quality reservoir with a lot of the oil in the higher porosity intervals, and I think the tall cotton analysis that I did, although very cursory, is probably more in line with what I would expect in the MSU.
Well, so there was a discussion on the tall cotton, and, I just want to know, let's say you just look at the tall cotton, apart from, or let me put it this way, are there any technical difficulties that they faced, that contributed to, let's say, less recovery from the tall cotton, or is just purely based on geology?
Basically, there could be technical issues that I'm not unaware of, but I use the actual physical data of the production and its trend currently.
But you also listen to Steve Melza talking about all the technical issues, even they did not listening to him, so he talked about actual technical issues that really resulted in that failure. Did you incorporate that into your analysis?
No, I didn't. And well, most of the stories of things that go wrong, there's always stories, but I try to look back at the actual data and say, well, okay, this is the data. If you can explain it, I'd love to see it. Can you show me that data? And then I'd make adjustments. But in this case, it was a screening, and I think it's, anything on the technical issues that may have caused that to be a lower recovery, I did not incorporate.
So the Seminole does the Seminole have a main pay zone and then the ROZ?
Correct.
Is it not analogous to the AMSU? Based on even your testimony and that of Dr. Davidson's testimony?
Do I think that's a good analogy?
Yeah.
No. It's higher quality rock.
Now let's talk about the raw quality. So I do know that there are different ways that we can come up with the raw quality, especially when we can also utilize the portrait sizes, which has been more or less established in the industry. So why did you or your team not really did more detailed analysis, especially when you are referring to the reservoir quality?
Yeah. I guess there could have been more detailed work done, but I think I just did not do that.
So the actual reservoir quality analysis that Dr. Davidson worked on, would you agree that probably is extreme?
Extreme low, high.
Okay. So if you look at the profile that he used, the RI and then the saturation, and he tried to more or less use the that plot to more or less illustrate that the EMSU or the San Andres is more or less oil wet. So I'm saying that if you look at that plot superimposed with the saturations, is it not really extreme? Especially when at some point, if you pick this phases model, then you are more or less saying probably the water saturation has to start from 80% or 90%. Was that not extreme?
It is dependent on the actual lithology that you interpret. And I think Dr. Davidson used the core data in the upper San Andreas and to build that model and take that down from the log characteristics. So I think it's a case. I'm not sure if it's an extreme case.
Can we go to slide number 2 on your presentation? I know there was a discussion on this one. Can you tell the commission that it is your testimony that there was a migration of the oil, more or less the Wolfcamp being the source rock for the Greenback and the San Andreas? Is that your testimony?
Correct, yes.
Then I'll ask you the same question. Can you explain to the commission, how this migration pathway happens? When you say complex, it's complicated. I don't really understand. So how complex it is?
Well, my description of complex is basically at looking at the different accumulations in the San Andres throughout the Central Basin Platform. They're in different areas and different types of accumulations. And in some areas where you may expect to find oil, you don't. And some areas it's just unusual where the oil is, and I can't really explain how it got there. There's not a simple path. So that's what my complex issue is I don't understand how the oil got there.
And based on your testimony, you talk about the San Andres being so extensive throughout the EMSU and even beyond. Is that correct?
Correct. And I guess the lower San Andres, because there's an upper San Andres and a lower San Andres. And so a lot of my difficulty with the nomenclature is people say San Andres and it's not specific. So for the large aquifer, I'm discussing the lower San Andres that is where the Goodnight's injecting.
So in the unitization documentation, was it specified lower and upper San Andres, or it was Greenberg and San Andres?
It's Greenberg and San Andres.
So do you have any objection when Empire says that the unitization zone is right from the Greenberg to the bottom of the San Andres?
No, I think that's an accurate description of the unit.
Now, another question that I had, we've been going back and forth on this. You have a lot of experience. You've helped a lot of companies, in this type of litigations. Have you ever seen any external company that do not have any producing, let's say, interest in the unitization zone being allowed to bring in water from different sources to inject? Have you seen that before?
No.
Why do you believe that there has never been a precedent for that?
I do not know, but I think in this situation that there would be a distinct physical geologic reason why they both can coexist.
Let's move to slide number 4. So you said that you classified the San Andres as whether upper or lower, or let's say the lower, okay, as a large aquifer.
Yes.
Large aquifer. Now, how do you determine the boundary?
That is a very good question because I think one of the most surprising things in going through this is understanding that the San Andres is under pressure at about 0.38 or so PSI per foot. And again, complexity, I don't really know how to explain that, but the amount of water that was withdrawn in the early days and the amount of water that was injected and the very limited changes in pressures would all point to just a very large aquifer that, taking out 340 million barrels and having limited pressure drop would portend to a very large tank, being that 340 million barrels was a very small component of that.
Can we go to the slide where you actually mapped the PEM barriers, the one that you did yourself, that
Yes.
opposing counsel was going back and forth with you on? Right there. This one.
Mm-hmm.
So which zone are we in on the top figure?
That's all the Grayberg. So that is the producing intervals in the Grayberg that was, discovered in 1928, I think. But this paper was 1939 after they drilled, 450 or so wells. And it was basically an amalgamation of the data at that time.
And based on your discussion, were you more or less using this as an analogous potential barriers that could be seen in the San Andres?
These were all barriers that are in the Grayberg. So these are not in the San Andres.
So when you talk about the barriers, the PEM barriers that exist in the San Andres, is it analogous to what we're seeing here?
A little. I believe there's intervals, and in my TVD depth between say 500 and 700 TBD subsea, that there's a lot of petrophysical evidence that there's multiple perm barriers, both very, very extremely low and very moderately low. But a number of those barriers in amalgamation, I think, is an incredibly strong barrier to vertical fluid flow.
And do we have an extensive mapping based on the log data, how this will look like?
I have not done that mapping, no.
So I'm thinking about how, let's say we have pen barriers within the area where we are injecting, and then we are saying that it is a large aquifer. I'm trying to figure out, if there are barriers in there, why are we saying it's a large aquifer? I'm trying to just understand that.
Well, the large aquifer comes from the pressures. I think the last analysis I saw was that in a small area, there was 39 million barrels of oil injected. The pressure gradient.
Water injected? No.
Water injected. This is water disposal in the lower San Andres. And the average pressure for those 5 wells had a pressure gradient of 0.381. And after 39 million barrels were injected into that over about a year and a half, the pressure gradient was tested in all 5 of those wells, and the average was 0.383. So that's a 39 million barrels and a very, if you calculate that at the 0.002 gradient at the depth of 5,000 feet, that comes to about a 0.25 PSI per million barrels injected. And so that's one of my big indications of, when I talk about direct evidence, I think the biggest direct evidence is material balance, so pressures and volumes. And that really tells you a lot about the actual reservoir size. But as you were mentioning, the actual boundaries, that is very difficult, especially if you have these limited pressure variations with that kind of volume being injected in there.
So is there an expert from Goodnight who is going to really discuss to the commission the pressure situation? Is there someone that is going to testify on that?
Yes, I'll let the lawyers.
So I'm not going to bother you with that. I'm not going to bother you with that.
I've been exposed to it, but I am not the expert on the pressures.
Okay.
But it was very important in my testimony and my understanding of the reservoirs.
Okay. Can we go to slide number 5? Or even probably slide number 6 will be helpful. Slide number 6, yeah. Let's go to 6. So here you're showing us the locations, in the oil zone, and then also within the San Andres, where we do have the water supply wells, and then also the injection wells that are ongoing right on the east side. Where is the proposed new injections from Goodnight? Where is it going to be?
I will like to make a correction here. This is basically a alphabetical order. It's not a location order. So it just from right to left was just the well numbers in order. So it's not logistically, that's not west to east. It's just a diagram. So what I was trying to present with this was all of the critical data and critical wells that have tests or indications of fluid mobility in all of the zones. So all of the red wells in the middle were either petrophysics or the only wells that tested something below the producing oil water contact. So sorry about that. I didn't make that clear before.
Okay. Now, we talked about the PEM barriers. So are you also confirming the testimony from Dr. Davis that Dr. Davison that there are hydrides that cause those PEM barriers?
Yes, his interpretation was anhydrites or low permeability, low porosity intervals.
So when he was testifying, it sounded like he doesn't have any concrete evidence.
Direct core data, I don't think he has in that interval.
What about Mudlogs.
Mudlogs, I think there were a few that go through there, but I don't know if there was, I defer to Dr. Davidson.
And then he also testified that it was not continuous. Is that fair?
Yeah, he could not, I don't think he could correlate, one interval across the entire area.
Now, are these PEM barriers something that has been established, in the Permian, or let's say in the EMSU as a well-established PEM barriers, isolated formation that has been well established that there are PEM barriers here that more or less serve as a cap rock?
I think the only detailed information is from the Seminole and the Hobbs units in their CO2 applications. They went through and had detailed studies and said that there was no communication throughout the San Andreas from the deeper zone. So, but I don't think there's any, confirmation literature that states this is a consistent perm barrier across the Central Basin Plateau.
And I thought you said you don't want to use the Seminole as an analogous field to the EMSU.
Exactly, and those are the only two that I know that have had deeper studies on the communication between deeper. But again, not a very good analogy.
So let me ask you: has there been any discussion about this PEM barrier issues between Goodnight and Empire?
I don't believe I'd have to defer to. I mean, I wasn't in the communications there.
And has there been any communication from Empire based on even all the testimony that you've listened to about any PEM barrier?
I don't think I have not been familiar with any communications between anybody at Empire.
So, you're taxing the commission to really make a tough decision here, where you're providing as an expert testimony that there exists a PEM barrier that separates out Goodnight's injection zone from where you believe the ROZ could be. Now, if I ask you right now, where is the Greenberg? Is it extensive in the EMSU? I'm sure you're going to say yes.
Yes.
Right? If I ask you about the lower San Andreas, you say it's extensive, right?
Correct.
If I ask you about the upper San Andreas, you can really pinpoint that and say right here is there, right? Why can't we have the same for the PEM barrier? We need right evidence, strong evidence that could be mapped.
No, I think that's a good question. It could be, you could do some geologic considerations and make a map that would support it. But I think all the current data that I've reviewed doesn't suggest that there's any communication between the two. And I think the pressure differences and just the reservoir characteristic, the dramatic differences between the lower San Andreas and the Grayberg and that upper San Andreas, I think are sufficient to basically make that statement, in my opinion, that's strong indications of a barrier.
So that one we're talking about time T is equal to 2024, right? But Goodnight is proposing to inject huge volumes of water. And, I don't want to go into the pressure discussion with you.
Yeah.
I prefer to wait so we can get into that. But you've seen these baffles, and based on your testimony, it's not extensive.
Well, the individual baffles are not extensive, but the preponderance of significant numbers of them in all the wells that we looked at, I think, and amalgamated the preponderance of them says there's significant perm barriers as a group.
Yeah, but that is essentially based on some of the logs that you looked at. But there's no well-documented evidence, or let's say there's no core to support that claim.
Okay.
And even Dr. Davidson and yourself, you're saying that we don't need any further data. The commission has enough data to make decisions. Do you still stand by that?
I think for the injection in the lower thing, that there's no pressure buildups, no indication of vertical migration, that there's no evidence that I think that has any um, influence on the shallower reservoirs above.
So is there someone from Goodnight who's going to tell us about Goodnight's injection and their perceived impact on existing operations?
Yes.
Okay. Can we go to slide number 7? Thank you. You know, and let's say majority of the experts, almost everybody has a lot of experience in the industry, right? So you are presenting your portion. New Tech presented their portion. Scott also did the same thing. Now, my question to you is, as you shown us this, even from the original one, the revised one, and then even your original one and all of that, first question is, do you see any evidence of oil in the San Andres?
No. Well, the only in some of the cores there was some staining, but from a significant portion, continuous saturations that is kind of required for an ROZ, no.
Well, if we look at the EMSU 679, I mean, it is well established that there is oil, at least based on that EMSU 679, and then also the RL Bell well, it is established that there is at least some oil in place.
There is some oil. And I think most of the analysis went to the significance of that oil and its aerial extent or its vertical extent.
So assuming that New Tech, Ops Geologic, they all overestimated the oil in place, what about the core?
The core for which?
Okay, let me rephrase my question. Assuming that New Tech, Ops Geologic, and then even Dr. Davison, you know, they've all interpreted. Scott also did the same.
Yes.
Dr. Buckhead. So they've done all of this, and there is a contention with regards to which one is correct. Which one is correct? My question is, what is the core saying?
Well, the core correlates best with Dr. Davidson's.
I want to show you. This one will be Scott's rebuttal. So he compared EMSU 679 compared to that of Goodnight and Empire. So I want to approach the witness and show him to refresh your memory on.
That'd be good.
Can I get a reference for that exhibit?
L6.
Okay, so if we can have that on. Okay, we have.
I think that.
So in here, we are looking at the EMSU 679 that do have actual evidence of the core. Now, you're saying that it is only Dr. Davison's analysis that matched the core, let's say, to your satisfaction. What you see on track 9 and track 10, is it not a good match?
The 9 and 10.
That's,
Yeah, there. I think if you look.
Yeah, let's go to where the
let's
core is.
zoom
Yeah,
in.
right there.
Yeah, so there are areas that there's significant differences between the saturations from, and this is OPS's, correct? OPS's petrophysics. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe Dr. Baku.
It is.
Yeah, he's comparing all the different analyses that were done.
So there's certain intervals in there that are significantly overestimated from the SO, especially as you get lower. And I think I brought up that in my testimony that, you know, if this is an ROZ, then the depths the last, I don't know, 50 to 100 feet indicate that there's a lowering of oil saturation in the cores, which might suggest the base of an ROZ.
So have you seen any testimony where Empire has estimated based on the core, or even if Goodnight have done that, based on the core, the actual core, not corrected core, the actual core, what is the average saturation within the San Andreas?
You know, I didn't do the San Andreas nomenclature, so I just did TBD subsea depths. So I have not done what is the oil saturation in the San Andreas in this core.
Can we bring back the slides one more time?
Yeah. Does this have a San Andreas top on that? We're over to one. So they're in the lower part of the San Andreas.
Yes.
Or what is? There's 2 San Andreas picks. This is basically a good example of the difficulty of having different people pick San Andreas top, because it makes a significant difference on what you're going to do for the average saturation. And basically all my analysis was done on a TBD subsea base. So I didn't get into that nomenclature, but I did see that degradation in oil saturations as you go deeper.
Yeah, let's go to slide number 8 on your presentation, hopefully. Slide number 8. So on slide number 8, I'm just focusing on the analysis that Dr. Davidson worked on.
Mm-hmm.
Do we see any oil saturation?
There are few intervals that are above 40%, but most of them are below 20%.
But within 20% and then 40%, or let's say below, above 20%, do you see significant saturations?
Only above the producing oil water contact.
But what about the below the producing oil water contact?
Very limited.
Do we see or is not?
Well, I guess numerically, I would say there's maybe 50 feet out of 250, or maybe 10 to 20% of the rock is above 40%. Rough estimate.
Yeah, let's go to
some, but not a lot.
Can I proceed?
Okay.
Okay. So based on Dr. Davidson's testimony, he testified to the commission that he believes that there is an ROZ on the Upper San Andreas. Do you believe that or not?
Not from this well.
So generally, this is just an example. So he testified to the commission that he believes that there is an established ROZ in the Upper San Andreas. Is that your testimony, or you more or less probably have a problem with that?
Again, he's using the San Andreas terminology. I know between -350 and -500, I have a potential ROZ. But not a definitive. And if I was looking at this well, I would say that this wouldn't be a strong indication of an ROZ.
Yeah, then let's look at slide number 10. These are all core data, which I like. Is it showing any oil saturation or no oil saturation within the San Andreas?
Again, I'm not sure the depth of who's San Andreas top, but yeah, I would have to rejigger this for whoever's San Andreas top I'm trying to use. But the big picture on this is that the core data saturations and their profile versus porosity versus the same theme in the analysis doesn't appear to be, appears to be contradictory a little.
You know, let's say from my point of view, Goodnight is giving us different estimations of, let's say, oil saturation. Empire is doing the same. So if we can stick to the core, because the core is the real evidence that we all have, you know, let's say all the models that have been done trying to fit to the core, and based on that, try to predict how it's going to be on the other ones. So I just want to look at the core and just look at the core and see what it's saying.
Yes.
You know, we can just debate about the overestimations here and there, but what is the core showing us? So on this particular slide, you have a potential ROZ, you do have transition zone, and then you have the aquifer.
Correct.
So I'm asking you, looking at the core, the EMSU 679 core data, do we see any evidence of oil saturation?
Yes, there's oil saturation in the core.
Okay.
In the
Let's go to slide number 11. So I asked you whether you've calculated the average saturation in the core. You said you've not done that.
well, I guess this gives the average saturation in the core. So if I did say that, I was in error.
Okay, so let's focus on the first track. Is this one the actual core or the corrected core?
The actual, not corrected.
So how was the 14.8786 calculated?
It was the arithmetic average of the core values.
Without any cutoffs, all the core values?
Yes.
Did Empire did the same analysis?
I don't remember.
So it would be good for the commission to know, based on the existing core data, what is the actual average saturation that we are seeing in the core? You know, I can cross-check. I'm pretty sure some of Empire's experts probably might have presented that. So that is something that would be very, very helpful to the commission. At least you've presented something here, but I don't know how accurate it is. But these are real data that we do have. So it would be good for the commission to know what is the actual average oil saturation within, let's say, the upper San Andreas, the lower San Andreas. That would be very, very helpful to us.
I don't believe we have any core data in the lower San Andreas.
So when you put your marker right there, you say it's an aquifer, where is that?
That's at -700 TBD sub C.
So where is that?
Depending on which geologist you talk to, it could be various places.
I mean, so what should I take? I mean, the commission, what should we take?
In my opinion, basically 700 and below, there's no evidence of hydrocarbons and a lot of evidence of significant water. above that, above 500, I think you have some evidence, higher evidence of oil in place in the core and in the log analysis. And in between 500 and 700 feet, it's like a what I call a transition zone, but very little oil in place. Probably doesn't look like an ROZ to me, but
sir, so this one is just a type log. I mean, are you going to, is it your testimony? I know there was a back and forth. Is it your testimony to the commission that right within the San Andreas, minus 700 across is all, is your testimony that across 700 on all wells is an aquifer based on your testimony?
yes, below that subsea depth, I believe is all an aquifer. Yes.
But I thought there were back and forth where you identified that barrier. You said below that was when you were getting all the mud losses.
Yes.
I mean, it was a little bit, it was so curious to me that, you know, I've worked with a lot of petrophysicists, a lot of geologists, and only God knows how long it takes them to all come to a conclusion on what the tops are. So it's a little bit surprising to me that the senior geologist, you said you depended on the petrophysicist to get you the tops. Is that not surprising?
No, as I mentioned before, the quagmire of where you pick the top, if I waited for a geologist to come up with a specific top and define it, I would be waiting for my analysis. But using the subsea depths, which is a lot of in the CO2 work, you do pore volume, hydrocarbon pore volume depth migration. So I think the critical part is what is your volume of oil versus depth. And so I basically, it irks some people, but I just took the TVD subsea depth and waiting for someone to have a definitive definition of what the San Andreas top is.
So is it your testimony that the average core saturation within the, let's say, depending on how you call it, but the San Andreas is 14.86%. That is your testimony.
For the core interval, that's the total interval.
So it's your testimony that your average oil saturation is 14.86.
Part of that's in the Grayberg, though, I believe, by most people's definition. I know.
Okay. So I just want to know, you've looked at the data, you've provided this to the commission. The 14.86, is it within the San Andreas or where is it?
It is the complete data set. And I guess if you gave me specific tops, we could calculate the average porosity but each person's going to have a different top. So, but I think the important thing here is as you get lower in this section, the oil saturation in the core goes significantly lower. So at that negative 700 TBD subsea in this well, there's a significant shift in the oil saturations to be much lower.
You know, I was trying to do a little bit of math where I would just use oil in place calculation formula to try and get some numbers here. Now, so you estimated 14.86, and I really wanted to understand, is it a good number for the commission to calculate, let's say roughly, how much oil is going to be in place based on the core?
I think it all depends on what your tops are. I think the way I would do it was I'd stick to my intervals of 350 to 500, 500 to 700, and 700 below, and I'd have the core average oil saturations for those intervals, and then it would match up with all my analysis.
Yeah, I thought that was what you were trying to show the commission, that see these are all the core points that we have, but the average saturation is 14.86. I thought that is what you wanted the commission to take out from here.
Yeah, most of the analysis was, I believe this was from a rebuttal. So it was basically doing due diligence on the other petrophysical analysis and saying, okay, does it match core? Which one do I agree with? Which one do I think is the best representation of the core data? And so this wasn't specifically done for an oil in place calculation that I'm very supportive of your questions and the information that would be helpful to you.
Yeah, so if you look at Mr. Macbeth's the economic analysis that he presented to the commission, he used 10% or so. So I was just curious, if the core is telling you 14 point, let's say 86, why then do you even use 10%, and estimating to say that there is no economic value?
I think it would depend on the depth interval that you were evaluating. And I don't remember exactly the depth interval that John was evaluating.
Okay. Yeah, so there was a lot of testimony, especially with the Empire experts. They talk about the core data should be the minimum value. But it sounds like Dr. Davidson do have a different opinion, where even he wants to apply a correction factor to even that data. Can you try to explain to the commission, both ends?
Well, the core data, oil saturations do need a correction. And Dr. Davidson used one, I think it was 1.22, but it looks like the other experts in this case used a much larger correction. And so that difference between 1.22 and I really don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but it's significantly more correction. And I think one of the issues that I had with that is that down in the lower San Andreas, that's going to be lower in the section. And if it is residual oil, you'd use a lower V sub O since it has already been flushed. And I think that kind of, just in a ballpark, would indicate that you need a lower, expansion factor to have your uplift. And I think Dr. Davidson did a pretty rigorous calculation and came up with his range of 1.22 up to 1.26, I think. And I think that's a most likely reasonable. I mean, you could have some variations around there, which I think he did, but he just used one number.
And did that correction factor increase the saturation or decrease the saturation?
No, increase. Increased by about 22%.
Okay. So how much weight do you put on the analysis, Empire's experts analysis, and Dr. Davidson's analysis, and then also the core?
I go back to the core as being my hard, distinct physical evidence. And so I tried to compare all the analysis back to that core data. And Dr. Davidson seems to be in my opinion, the best correlation with the actual core data.
So is Goodnight going to provide the commission what they believe the average oil saturation is within the upper San Andreas and then the lower San Andreas?
Yes, I could do that if someone would agree on a San Andreas top.
I mean,
but I can do it from a depth interval. I feel very comfortable. That's where.
Now, I think Goodnight do have their tops, right?
Yes.
So when you say that, depending on the top, I mean, you are the chief geologist, understands, making a case for Goodnight. So Goodnight do have a top, or you don't have a top?
No, I do believe Goodnight has an interpreted top.
So if Goodnight can provide a commission, their top, and then let's say the average oil saturation within that, both for the upper and then the lower. And I'm hoping that Empire should provide the commission with the same data.
Excellent.
And we do, I don't know if the commission, we do have the actual core data or not in terms of the numbers. It would be good
Yes.
for us to also look at it and do our own calculations with that as well.
Excellent.
Slide number 14. Okay, we've already talked about it. You said this one was in the greenback, so I appreciate that. Now, there has been a lot of discussions about Dr. Backwater. Now, the more I listen to Goodnight's experts, the more I get more comfortable with the work that he did. So is it your testimony that within the San Andres, there are high streak permeability, vox, cast within the San Andres?
Within the lower San Andreas, yes.
Now, tell the commission why you are opposing to what Dr. Backwater did when he put that permeability within the San Andres as part of his simulation.
I'm not sure I disagreed with the permeability. I mean, I think the reservoir model, what I disagreed with is the geology inputs into it and the oil in place. The permeabilities, the distribution of permeabilities, maybe the magnitude. I didn't really have that much of an opinion on the actual permeabilities.
So Dr. Davidson and then yourself presented different theories as to how he could have gotten the water into the Greenberg, for the wells that were producing more water.
Yes.
So you have all the theories that could be a possible solution. Why did Goodnight not present that in a model to the commission?
I do not know.
So let me follow up on that and ask if Goodnight did had all the input data that Dr. Backwater used in his model. I'm asking if Goodnight got all the input data that went into Dr. Backwater's modeling.
Did we get all the data? I'd have to default to, I think, John Macbeth. But I don't think I think there was a hard time getting all the actual data out of the model and the data that supported the input parameters.
So I just want to reiterate this point again. Were there any anhydrite identified in the RRBL number 4 well and then also the EMSU 679 that had a core? Are there any established or any documented anhydrites that were found in any of the core?
I think I recognize some anhydrite initials by some of the cores, but I don't remember seeing a significant bedded anhydrite interval.
Okay. Let's go to slide number 24. So here you're showing tier 2 and then tier 1. And the bottom, I presume, is it oil or water saturation?
That is oil saturation.
So here, when you say producing zone, which formation are we talking about?
The green symbols at -350 are Grayberg, and if you use OPS's model, some of the San Andreas.
Okay. So here, do we see, so assuming you're saying that the green is all Greenberg producing zone,
Yes,
and then the blue will be the potential ROZ, which will be based on your nomenclature, that will be the Upper San Andres.
correct.
And then you have the Lower San Andres, and then let's say the aquifer zone more or less becoming the transition zone, and then the water aquifer.
Correct.
Okay. Do we see any oil saturation within the tier 2 and then tier 1?
In which interval?
All of them. Just or probably
yeah.
you can just focus on the residual zone and then also the transition zone.
Yeah, the potential ROZ, there is some tier 1 and I'd say a significant amount of tier 2.
And then I saw that maybe this one is different, but the one that I reviewed earlier on, it sounded like it had a total oil in place there. I think there were three.
Yeah, there were 3 columns.
Yeah. What did you change your testimony or?
No, I just shortened it so it would fit on that half of the graph.
Yeah, because the one that I reviewed, it sounded like you were showing over 200 million for the potential residual oil zone. Is that the correct number?
Yeah. So what I did to get to that number was extrapolated the averages for the wells across the entire EMSU. And basically, I don't think that's a realistic way of doing it, but I want to be, I mean, I was just trying to match what other people did by, okay, how do I compare my oil in place to theirs? Well, they extrapolated it over the entire interval, so I did it also. But I think the critical issue on recovery is the concentration of oil. You know, if you have, 1 barrel of oil in 100 feet or 1 barrel of oil in 1,000 feet, the higher concentration is much more valuable. You get a higher recovery factor. So I think the critical issue that I'm trying to focus on here is the oil concentration in MBO per section.
Yeah, but so based on your analysis, I saw over 250 million barrels. So are you saying that Empire should not go for it?
Well, if it was equally distributed over the entire area by just extrapolating the data points, that's the number you get to. But I think a better way of analyzing it is to look at the concentration in a section area. And if you were going to do a pilot, you'd pick a section, and this is the average oil in place in that section. So I think it's a much easier reference if you're going to go to that next step of trying to determine how economic it would be to recover. Because you can do a pilot in a square mile area and come up with a spacing, how many wells are in it, how much oil you're recovering, rather than having a large volume of 250 million barrels over 11,000 acres and, 10 acre spacing, you'd need 1,000 wells. This way you can get a more functional economic unit to kind of evaluate your.
You talked about the San Andreas being under pressure. And I promise I'm not going to go much detail with you on that. But, coming to that conclusion, did you incorporate the supply water wells, the withdrawals from that wells into your analysis?
Well, there were 2 points. I think there was a 1959 study that was introduced a little earlier that had about a 0.38 something. And then just some recent data that I think was supplied to the commission that showed these local area where Goodnight has injected a number and came up to 3.83 as a current. And so 1959 to current having almost identical pressures. I guess that it kind of incorporates the ups and downs of injection and withdrawals in the region.
In one of your slides, I saw that you had a PEM barrier that you put in. I saw that in one of your
Yeah,
slides.
it was.
A
think-
yellow region mapped as a PEM barrier. Do you remember something like that?
I think there were a number. There was one on the 746 well, and then my cross section with two wells that I was trying to do a sensitivity analysis on. I forget which.
Yeah, that is
slide
the
that
two
would be.
wells.
Yeah, the
So
two
that
wells.
would be on page 24 of your 32 total pages.
Is it in Mr. Knight's testimony, Dr. Ampoma?
Yes,
Yeah, in the summary
was-
slides.
label as now Goodnight number 8. Testimony exhibit E.
Yeah.
There was two wells
Wells.
with a cross section where we do have a PEM barrier, a permeability barrier.
Page 32.
24 out of 32. Yeah, right there.
Oh, okay. This is an older one.
Oh, there's another one. Is
Yeah.
another one? Can you talk to it or?
Yeah, I can talk to anything.
So I want to know, is your PEM barrier the same as that picked by Dr. Davison?
I'm not 100% sure. This was an early well, and these are actually the two wells that had spectral gamma rays. And you were asking earlier how far those were away, and I guess they're 3 miles and maybe a little more than 3 miles away. But yes, that perm barrier is, I think the better slide to do is in the my summary slides. I think it's probably halfway through, maybe page 12.
Yeah, probably. Let me just ask a general question. The PEM barrier that you picked, are they the same as the ones that Dr. Davison picked, or is different? Could be differences.
Different. There are sensitivities in perm barriers. And so what I was trying to show in that cross section is, the OPS's perm barriers or barriers that were based on a 1.5% porosity, which I thought was very low. And then I just tried to use a more reasonable, most likely, 50% perm barrier or not at 7% porosity. And then I also used the 0.02 perm that Dr. Burkhead had determined, and use that. And if you use any of those situations, you can get a significant number of perm barriers throughout the entire section.
So is it your testimony that your PEM barrier was strictly based on porosity permeability cutoff, and Dr. Davidson's PEM barriers were based on anhydrite?
Correct.
So which one should the commission take?
My guess is both are probably
And even
together, there's just a lot of perm barriers.
so, is there a cross section that shows entirely? So, if you look at this cross section figure 4 that we are seeing right now, can you also have the same cross section showing the commission how you picked your barrier throughout the EMSU, the same for Dr. Davison?
Yes, we could do that. I don't think I have.
Now, let me ask you, so these series of questions were based on the cross. I just want to clarify some few things. Did Goodnight already have their own PEM barrier before you, prior to your work?
I do not know.
Did you review the application to the division?
I guess briefly.
So there was no baseline for you to compare your work to?
No, I'm basically totally independent.
Then when they say that confirm barriers, what were they referring to in your scope of work?
I'm not really sure what they were conferring to, but I took that as review the perm barrier and tell me what you believe.
Review the PEM barrier and tell me what you believe. What PEM barrier? If it's not there,
Correct.
what PEM barrier?
Well, semantics, but basically I was going to look for the communication between those two. And I think they believed there was a perm barrier in there. So I think they said, confirm this perm barrier. And basically in my line of business, people tell you a lot of things, but you basically go back to the data, put your professional opinion on it and tell them. A lot of times it's not what they want to hear. But in my line of work, it's just, you have to have, your best effort at getting to the right answer.
So you made a comment as part of the cross. You said San Andreas is not a defined interval. Do you remember something like that?
Mhm.
But Empire believes that they've described the San Andreas. So,
Yep.
I'm just trying to understand in terms of you saying that the San Andreas is not well defined. So why should we agree with your interpretation?
Basically, mine is a reservoir characterization. So I look at the oil, the potential reservoir. So I look at pore volume, permeability, and isolation of intervals and zones that can be just exploited economically. And if you have multiple reservoirs in one of the big things we have is work for many big companies that are in the same reservoir. They all have different nomenclature for different tops and different intervals. And I don't really care what they call it. I'm going to pick, this is an interval that I think is a boundary here, and this is a separate interval, and they can call it anything they want. But all I need to do is decide what the reservoir characteristics are in those individual zones. And so I apologize that it's very difficult, this nomenclature thing. It's more of a legal issue than a reservoir characterization.
So you also made mention of potential barrier.
Yes.
You recall that? Does that mean that we don't have enough data to confirm that?
I generally don't like to make affirmative statements of 100% certainty on really anything, because in the oil business, you realize that things can happen, and you look at the preponderance of data, all the data you evaluated, and it suggests that there's a perm barrier there. And I would say, on an individual basis, it's a potential perm barrier. But when I have a preponderance of significant number of potential perm barriers, then it becomes more likely that there's a significant barrier to fluid migration.
So, sir, you made a good point here. You said that you want to attach uncertainty to your estimations. You don't want to really tie yourself to a particular, let's say, decision or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, I've reviewed you showed us clearly all the wells that you perform petrophysical analysis on.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say Dr. Davidson did that. I've also reviewed all the work that Ops Geologic did, that New Tech did. It's all based on uncertainty, right? So why should the commission not give Empire the opportunity to go and explore based on the uncertainties that we are all seeing here?
Well, I think some of it's precedence, and from my look at the reservoirs, I think the certainty, the alleged resources that are proposed for the lower San Andreas, I think Jim Davidson's analysis, in my opinion, is more accurate and indicates that there's little to no significant oil in the lower San Andreas. And then it also comes down to just in general, the New Mexico oil and gas industry in itself this water disposal, there's about 1,700 horizontal wells completed a year in the Delaware Basin. And that comes out to about 70,000 barrels a month of new production. And at a water oil ratio of 3-to-1, that's going to be around 210,000 barrels a month that New Mexico is going to have to find a place to put that water. And in a long term, that's just a month. So if you can extrapolate that out, very big numbers. But the other thing is that just the precedence of using the San Andres as a water supply and a water injection zone is just an industry common practice. And I think this reservoir is unique in this under pressure, which is, I'm still fascinated by how that came to be, but it does seem to be there. That I think for the best thing for the New Mexico state is to have these people both coexist. If I was asked by Empire what I would consider them doing, I said, your most oil in place, no matter whose petrophysical analysis you're looking at, is in the Grayburg. And you already have some infrastructure there. You have oil in place. And that's probably your most economic chance. And if you go down to the 350 to 500 foot interval, there is some indications. I believe that Jim Davidson's petrophysical analysis says there's very high risk. But if you believe your petrophysical analysis, then that 150 feet may be the next best thing to do. But I think jumping down into the lower San Andres, where I think there's significant evidence that there's the alleged resources down there may not exist at all, that I think there's plenty of activity that they could do above there. I guess that's my general feel of just reviewing the reservoir quality, the oil in place, the certainty of the evaluations that we've looked at. I think the preponderance of actual physical evidence, I think supports my conclusion and Jim Davidson's petrophysical analysis.
Yeah, so you're saying that based on the data, based on the evidence that is available, that is your opinion, right?
Correct.
Now, but so the commission, you've not shown us any evidence that there's an isolation between the lower San Andres and then the upper San Andres. You don't have a physical evidence to show the commission that this is the barrier that we believe that there is no communication between the upper San Andres and then the lower San Andres. Is there any literature supporting that? Any reference supporting that?
I don't know of any literature that states that, no.
And then your opponent is saying there's no barrier.
Yeah, I don't quite understand that conclusion.
No, but you've not shown us a cross section, no literature showing that there's a clear barrier between the lower San Andres and then the upper San Andres. So what evidence, what preponderance of evidence have you shown to the commission that we've mapped up, this is our barrier? So this is our suggestion that let Empire focus on the upper and there will be no communication from the lower.
Yes, that's interesting the way this legal process works in the rebuttal versus the just do my work and present a case. So spent a lot of time rebutting some what I think are very unrealistic data use for saying there is communication between there. I really don't see any evidence, and just the geologic system here, I don't think there's any realistic way there's any communication between the two. But you're correct that as a distinctive literature map, definitive map, I do not have that. I have not created one. And I can see how that would be helpful to the commission.
I've listened to all the testimony, and I'm looking forward to a dialogue with Larry Lake, Professor Larry Lake. Let's say, and I don't want to get into the pressure issue with you.
Interesting discussion, though.
Yeah, let's say when you look at the let's say production history, what is withdrawn, what is, let's say, put in, you are right. There is a clear evidence that there's no communication, right? But what about that huge volume of water that has been proposed? Have you forecast into the future? You've even, based on your own testimony, you're telling the commission that there are cast. There are Pembury, there are some cast in there. So is that also not a risk if the commission allows a huge volume of water to be injected, even though now we do not have the evidence that there's a communication?
Well, again, I'd come back to the strongest evidence is material balance, which is volumes and pressures. And I think monitoring pressures would be a valid way of making sure that there isn't a pressure increase. And when you see one, then you can react. Currently, the way I see this now is that there's a reaction before the evidence shows that there's communication. But I think monitoring the pressure and allowing the current state and, and if you allowed 4 more permitted wells to inject a lot more oil, you'd get to an answer much quicker, the pressure monitoring. And it'd be very interesting because I just 0.383 over a large, it amazes me how little pressure variation for the volumes of water that were both extracted and input. It's just amazing, but it's just a unique situation. And I do believe that they can attack their most valuable asset, and Goodnight can help the oil industry produce all the oil they want.
But Mr. Wheeler was saying if Goodnight moved 2 miles away from their operations, they are not going to contest. So it's not like they are shutting you off. They provided options. Why not take it?
That is, I do not know. Out of my purview. Is that correct?
Yeah, okay. When you talk about there's no evidence that there's communication, I mean, the question that I will ask you is, if you see that bubble map that was shown to the commission and you see excessive water production, the question I have for you is, how did the operator solve that problem to have effective material balance communication?
I do not know.
So then it's still, so the person who owns all the data is saying there is a communication. And you're saying that you don't know, but I mean, so then, and you did not provide any theory or any model showing a different way as to how water can get, higher production can get through these wells. There has not been any evidence, no models from Goodnight to establish that, other than we don't know what went on.
Well, I agree. We did not have a reservoir model, but I think the 1939 paper that showed water at the crest of the structure in 1934, 35, 36, and 37 indicated that it was there. And the perm barriers, basically the migration paths that Dr. Lindsay shows, they're all around bedding planes. So that is the preferred mechanism for migration of all oil. It's laterally, it's not vertical. The perm barriers that are used to identify perm barriers are horizontal permeability. And so generally vertical permeability is a magnitude smaller. So using that as a perm barrier, I think would be maybe conservative. But I think just the geologic mechanisms of layered beds, migration along bedding paths, and also in Dr. Lindsay's fracture analysis, he described that the predominant amount of fractures were in the karsted intervals, and the karsted intervals are relatively thin. In the 679 well, they were between 1 and 3 feet, and there was one that was about 10 foot thick. But that's the limit of those karsts. And if most of the fractures are in those karsts, that would be that'd be a lateral fracture pattern that would increase the permeability horizontally, which in my opinion is the way all the water got into those wells. And I think if you actually look at the volumes, you take it out over the years and the cumes, the excessive water volumes, I think I estimated about 300 barrels a day. So it may have been a large volume, but it was over a long period. So the actual excessive values, I think from a total perspective, we're not quite as dramatic as I expected from looking at that big map with a mesh.
You know, you made a comment during the cross, and I thought that was interesting. You said something to the effect of Empire and its consultant did significant amount of work, and your responsibility was to review it and critique that instead of doing independent work to support the case. I mean, can you comment on that statement?
That's primarily my job, is to evaluate QC and when needed, do the evaluation myself. But that's a secondary step. Jim Davidson, or Dr. Davidson, is a petrophysicist. You know, he's been there about 20 years, but I find him incredibly intelligent, and most of his work turns out to be correct. Although criticized as, you know, we as a company occasionally are being criticized for being conservative, but we really are trying to present the most realistic case from the data that we see.
Yeah, and even if you look at Dr. Davidson's work, you know, I'm not criticizing his work. You know, same as, let's say, the consultants from Empire, or different strategies. But I do see some similarities in the work.
I agree.
And that is the core, right? So that is where I want to focus on. I mean, these higher volumes, I had my questions, you know, I went back and forth with the experts, you know, with some of these higher saturations and all of that. But I think the real evidence is the core. And I feel like all these analyses, they are all more or less in agreement with the core, some way, somehow. Do you believe that?
To some degree.
Okay. Now, is it your opinion that oil water contact is static?
No.
But I thought Empire's Council was going back and forth with you on that, and it sounded like you feel like it has to be a constant number that hasn't changed.
No, but I did disagree that producing oil and the contact going down would be inappropriate.
But you believe that oil water contact is not static?
It goes up. Gravity.
Oil water contact.
The water goes up. I may have misunderstood the question as it was directed, but the statement I heard was the oil water contact after production went down. And because he was talking about negative 350 and negative 550.
I can probably clarify the confusion I created. Based on the publication that we showed that slide, they wrote that it was in error on the original one and that it was actually at 540, 550 sub C, which is what Dr. Lynn. So the early one was an error. The lower one was accurate, and that's been written on.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Now, has anyone from Goodnight done thorough analysis on how the proposed saltwater injection in combination with the existing saltwater injection going to have, you know, considering the PEM barriers that has been discussed?
The alleged firm barriers, or?
I mean, I'm not going to say alleged. Is there someone going to discuss that in more detail, you know, to the commission that you know?
I'm not sure. Do not know. I would assume so.
Okay. Okay. I think I'll end here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Hearing Officer, can I have 2 questions to follow up? I'm over here on the left.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
I'm not used to looking over there for, sure, absolutely. Go for it, Mr. Chandler.
All right, so it's both parties are in the same unit. If the commission decides it's a tie and wants to divide it up, what is the number or the new division should be in the sandbox?
Oh, is that a question to me?
That is a question. Don't-
I would do -500 and -700. That interval would be like the demilitarized zone of, and we'd monitor it very distinctly to see if there's any evidence that there's any vertical movement up and down from there.
And so there are existing permits that Goodnight has. Would they be, do the existing permits, are they in the DMZ zone already?
I'm not even sure where they're located.
And the proposed ones, are they in the DMZ zone?
You mean perfed within the -700 to -500 TVD subsea depth?
Yes.
I don't think they are, but
I guess, will there be a witness that will explain historically why the existing Goodnight wells were chosen at that number, where they were drilled?
I guess the location, I'm not sure. The depth at which they were completed was the understanding of the reservoir and the karsting below that -700 approximately depth.
So there was already previous work figured out why these existing wells were drilled to a specific depth,
I believe so.
and that will be presented?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that appropriate?
Thank you, Mr. Chandler. So this brings us to redirect examination. Is there any possibility, remote possibility, that we might finish this witness today?
No,
No.
no.
Hope springs eternal.
Mhm.
All right. Let me ask you, Mr. Rosato, so, I mean, we still have almost 25 minutes. Shall we use it, or what are your thoughts, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Rankin, can you, would you be able to have a good stopping point in 25 minutes, or would you just prefer to start first thing in the morning?
I don't have in my mind how I'm going to segregate up the questions. I'm just going to walk through my notes. So I don't have a distinct stopping point in my mind. I could start and do a few minutes and we could break, or if everyone's, we could start in the morning. I'm fine either way.
For the sake of continuity, then maybe we should just start first thing in the morning. That will allow you to gather your thoughts. It'll allow the witness to have a break as well. And I mean, it's only 25 minutes, so it's not like we're wasting that much time for today.
All right, that's great. And along the lines of hope springing eternal, if you gather your thoughts and get organized overnight, maybe cross-examination will be shorter.
It's a good chance.
All right, great. All right, then if there's nothing further, we'll be off the record for the day. We'll see everybody again tomorrow at 9. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.